The story you are about to hear is about a husband who, upon learning of his wife's family facing bankruptcy, allowed his entire family to drive her away to avoid being implicated. 2 months later, with no news of her, he went to her hometown to find her, only for an unexpected revelation to leave him completely shattered. A late November afternoon in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The wind blew through the roofs of the old suburban houses, and the smell of wood smoke lingered in the driveways. The streets were still busy with people, but inside our family's storefront home, there was a coldness that, even years later, I have never been able to warm. My name is Arthur Sterling. That year, I had just turned 36. I am the eldest son of a family that had been running a hardware and lumber supply business in the city for over 20 years. My father, Robert Sterling, was a gentle, quiet man. He spent his whole life calculating bags of cement and trucks of gravel, but he was incredibly clumsy when it came to keeping the peace in his own home. My mother, Eleanor, was a sharp-tongued woman. She was excellent at sales, excellent at keeping up appearances, and incredibly skilled at using words to hurt others while still believing she was entirely right. Aside from me, there was my younger sister, Clara. Clara was already married, but every few days she would run back to our house. Sometimes she brought fruit, sometimes she brought her kids to play, and sometimes she brought comments that would make a perfectly good dinner stick right in your throat. Her husband was Marcus Vance, my brother-in-law. Marcus was not a bad guy in the sense that he would stab anyone in the back, but his mouth was as sharp as a scalpel. Whenever he spoke, it was about money, masculine authority, and family prestige. Life is strange. The people who have never carried the weight of our family were always the most eager to teach others how to carry it. And then there was my wife, Madeline Hayes, originally from South Bend, Indiana. Madeline was 3 years younger than me. She had a slender figure, not blindingly glamorous like the women in commercials, but the longer you looked at her, the more warmth you saw. She spoke softly and did everything meticulously and cleanly. The first time I brought Madeline home to meet my mother, Eleanor looked her up and down, and then whispered to me in the kitchen that this girl would do. Madeline's family owned a mid-sized furniture and textile manufacturing plant. Her parents were respectable business owners, so marrying her meant we would never have to worry about people saying our family chose a bride carelessly. At the time, I just smiled. I thought my mother was praising Madeline. Only later did I understand. My mother did not look at her daughter-in-law with affection. She looked at her through the scale of social standing. As long as her family was wealthy, Madeline was a wonderful daughter-in-law. When her family fell on hard times, that exact same person, with those exact same hands, and that exact same polite voice, was treated by my mother like a thorn in her side. In the past, everyone who met me said I was a lucky man. I worked as a commercial sales manager for a large industrial equipment distributor. I was not a millionaire, but I made a very comfortable living. My family owned a property on a main road. My parents were healthy, my wife was gentle, and we had a solid family business. I knew how to speak politely, and no one ever had a reason to criticize me. Relatives would often say Arthur was a great catch. No gambling, no heavy drinking, no cheating. I was a solid man. I used to think I was solid too. I did not hit my wife. I did not betray her with another woman. I did not take our savings to a casino. I came home after work, ate dinner at home, paid the bills, and called her parents mom and dad. Hearing this, many people might say, well, what more could anyone want? I used to use those exact points to comfort myself. It is as if people believe that simply not committing obvious evils automatically makes them a decent person. It turns out, that is not true. There are sins that make no noise. There is no slap, no bruise, no sound of breaking plates. It is just a husband keeping his head down and eating his dinner while his wife is being scolded by his mother. It is a husband telling his wife that his sister is just joking when she makes a condescending remark. It is a husband telling his teary-eyed wife to just tolerate his mother because she is getting older. I did those things countless times. Every time Madeline was belittled by my mother, I would pull her into our bedroom and say in an exhausted voice that she needed to bear with it, that my mother was just stubborn but not evil. Madeline would look at me without arguing and simply ask if my silence would actually make things better. I answered immediately, feeling very wise, saying that holding your tongue keeps the peace. Looking back now, I just want to slap myself. They say holding your tongue keeps the peace, but no one tells you that one person has to hold their tongue forever just so everyone else can feel peaceful. If you hold it forever, peace never comes. Only the human heart rots away, piece by piece. Madeline was not a weak woman. She was gentle, but not a coward. It was just that she loved me, and she loved our family, so she chose to soften herself. Every morning, she woke up early to prepare breakfast. Every evening, she checked if my father had taken his medication and made sure my mother's foot bath was not kept out too late. Because I had a stomach ulcer, Madeline always left a thermos of warm oatmeal or a soft bagel in my briefcase. One time, I was rushing to a meeting, and she ran after me with my coat, reminding me to eat something before drinking coffee so my stomach would not act up. I laughed and called her an old lady. Madeline pursed her lips, saying if this old lady did not remind me, I would become an old man with a ruined stomach. Back then, I listened to those words as if they were perfectly ordinary. The terrifying thing about human nature is that whatever we receive daily, we easily mistake for someone else's mandatory duty. I grew as accustomed to Madeline's care as I was to the lights in the house. While the lights are on, no one looks up. It is only when the power goes out that the whole house panics in the dark. I am not telling this story to ask for pity. The person who deserves pity in this story is not me. I am the man who stood between his biological mother and his wife, thinking I was being fair, but actually leaning entirely toward the side that was hurting the woman I married. I called that cowardice filial piety. I called that silence keeping the peace. I called my wife's tears a woman overthinking things. It was not until Madeline walked out of that house that I understood. There are women who do not need to curse you, do not need to seek revenge, and do not need to cry for the world to see. They simply, quietly withdraw their love, pack a few clothes into a bag, and step through the door once. And for the rest of his life, the person left behind loses all right to ever ask them to come back. I used to think that driving a wife out of the house was a way to save face for the family. Later, standing in Madeline's empty room, looking at the hanger where she used to prep my dress shirts, I realized I had saved no face at all. I only kept a cold house, a remorseful mother, a father with his head bowed, and myself, a husband who learned how to feel pain far too late. Everything started when Madeline's family ran into trouble. A massive business failure, a mountain of documented debt, and my family's blinding pride turned a gentle daughter-in-law into a punching bag for all their bitterness. And I, the person who should have shielded my wife from that rain, stood hiding under the porch, telling her to just endure the storm. I want to tell this slowly and clearly, because some mistakes, if told in a rush, sound like minor issues. But in this life, many homes are not destroyed by a massive hurricane. They fall apart because drops of freezing water fall onto a warm heart, day after day, until that person no longer wants to be warm anymore. I married Madeline in the autumn, many years ago. At that time, Grand Rapids had just passed through a rainy spell, and the streets were crisp and cool. Our wedding was held at a large hotel downtown. Her family drove up from South Bend in a long line of cars. Everyone who looked at us said we were a beautiful couple. Our families were equally matched, with nothing to worry about. My mother wore a deep burgundy dress that day, her hair elegantly styled, smiling endlessly. She went from table to table greeting guests, and whenever someone praised the beautiful bride, she beamed. She would say Madeline was a wonderful girl, her parents were respectable business owners with a manufacturing plant, and our family was at peace having such a daughter-in-law. Hearing my mother say that, I felt immensely proud. Men are often foolish in thinking that if their mother praises their wife, it means their mother loves their wife. Only later did I realize my mother praised Madeline because behind Madeline was a wealthy family. As for Madeline herself being kind, enduring, or thoughtful, those things in my mother's eyes were just decorative extras. My father was different. Robert Sterling rarely spoke. He drank a beer with his new in-laws and smiled warmly. When Madeline poured him coffee the next morning, he held the cup with both hands and told her softly that from now on, this was her home. He told her if anything bothered her, she should speak up, because she was a daughter, not a stranger. Madeline bowed her head, her voice trembling slightly, thanking him and saying she still had much to learn. My mother, standing nearby, chimed in, half joking, saying that if she was clumsy, she would have to learn fast, because being the daughter-in-law of this house meant hosting huge holiday dinners and managing a lot of relatives. Madeline politely smiled and said she would remember. Just hearing her say yes, ma'am, made my heart feel warm. I thought my life was perfectly settled. A good wife, approving parents, a happy sister. If life were just a wedding album, everyone would be perfectly happy. It is a pity you cannot live inside a photograph forever. At that time, Madeline's family was doing very well. Her father, Thomas Hayes, owned a busy textile and furniture manufacturing plant in South Bend. Her mother, Martha, helped manage the payroll, inventory, and workers. They were not billionaires, but they owned land, a factory, and had a reputation for honest business. When my family drove down to Indiana for the engagement dinner, My mother looked at the rows of humming machinery and whispered to me that this family was acceptable. She said when marrying, you must look at the foundation of the house. I just thought my mother was being careful for my future. Madeline stood nearby and probably heard it, but she did not say anything. She just quietly poured water for my mother and asked her own mother to bring out more appetizers. After the wedding, Madeline moved into our 3-story house. The ground floor was the hardware and supply store, with the kitchen and dining room in the back. The second floor had my parents' room and our bedroom. The third floor was for storage and a guest room for visiting relatives. Even though Madeline came from money, she never acted entitled. Every morning, she woke up earlier than me, went downstairs to help my mother organize the display shelves, wiped down the counters, and only then got ready for her own commute. Once, I pulled her arm sleepily and told her she didn't need to try so hard. I told her my mother was strict but would not force her to do everything. Madeline adjusted her hair clip and smiled, saying she did it because it was her home now. She said my mother was getting older, and helping out was just the right thing to do. Hearing her call it our home brought me peace. I never knew that later on, I would turn that very home into a place where Madeline had to calculate every single word she spoke. My sister Clara was actually quite close to her sister-in-law at first. She would come over for dinner, hug Madeline's shoulders, and chirp about how amazing Madeline's roasted chicken was, asking for the recipe. Her husband, Marcus, would chime in saying Clara only knew how to order delivery on her phone. Madeline laughed and said it was easy, and she would teach Clara anytime. Marcus would look at me and say Arthur was blessed to have a wife who was both gentle and capable, and that men who married well saved themselves a lot of headaches. I played along and agreed. The whole family laughed. Back then, the laughter at our dinner table was genuine. My mother occasionally nitpicked if the soup needed a pinch of salt or if a towel was folded wrong, but she was never harsh. Madeline was tactful. Whatever anyone said, she agreed and adjusted. She just wanted to maintain harmony. The exact same harmony I would later use to force her to pay an agonizing price. It truly is remarkable how human beings manufacture their own tragedies and label it keeping the peace. The early years of our marriage were not incredibly romantic, but they were calm. I worked at the industrial distributor, sometimes entertaining clients until late at night. Madeline worked as a risk management analyst for a major supply chain logistics firm in Chicago. Her schedule was grueling, involving a brutal commute, but she still managed to stop by the grocery store on her way back. If I came home late, she would leave dinner on the stove with a sticky note on the fridge. It would say to eat the soup first to warm my stomach and to stop drinking late-night coffee. I used to tease her that she treated me like a child. Folding clothes, she would reply that a child actually listens, while I was a step worse. Those small jokes made our room feel like a real home. During a power outage one night, we sat on the balcony. Madeline looked down at the street and said she did not need us to be filthy rich. She just hoped that for every dinner, there would be someone waiting. I held her hand and confidently promised her that I would always be there. I meant it. I truly believed I could protect her. But a man's promises are very easy to make on a quiet night. It is only when the storm hits that you find out if your spine is made of steel or jelly. Madeline quickly memorized our family's habits. My father had chronic stomach issues, so she made sure he never drank black tea on an empty stomach. My mother had joint pain in her knees, so Madeline bought Epsom salts, eucalyptus, and a special foot basin to ease her pain on cold nights. For family gatherings, she kept a notebook detailing what everyone liked. Aunt Beatrice was a strict vegan, so Madeline made a separate tray of roasted vegetables. Uncle Silas could not handle spicy food, so she separated his portion of chili before adding spices. No one demanded she do these things, but she did them as naturally as breathing. Once, my father watched Madeline sorting his pills into a weekly organizer. He joked that Madeline was more careful than me, saying his own son probably didn't even know the names of his medications. I sat nearby and laughed, saying I was busy with work, but as long as Madeline remembered, it was fine. My father gave me a look but stayed silent. Only much later did I understand that look. He saw how heavily I relied on my wife, very early on. My mother was still sweet back then. She bragged to customers that her daughter-in-law was a hard worker and that our family was blessed. Madeline would just lower her head and smile. I smiled too. We all smiled. No one noticed that after all those compliments, my mother never once asked Madeline if she was tired, if she missed her own parents, or if she wanted to drive down to South Bend for a weekend. Our early happiness was like a perfectly set dining table. It looked delicious, but the bottom of the pot was already starting to scorch. It was just that while it still smelled like roasted garlic, No one bothered to check if the fire was too high. Then, late that year, Madeline's family business ran into a crisis. It started quietly with a few phone calls she took out on the patio, followed by her driving to South Bend more frequently. Her face grew exhausted. I was foolish enough to only casually ask if things were acting up at her parents' plant. Madeline replied that her parents' factory was going through a rough patch, but they said they could manage it. I nodded and asked no more. I thought not asking was a form of respect. In truth, not asking usually just means you do not feel affected yet. And the moment Madeline's family began to slip, the look in my mother's eyes when she looked at her daughter-in-law began to change color. The crisis at the Hayes manufacturing plant was not loud at first. There were no debt collectors pounding on doors, no shouting in the streets, and certainly no gambling or scandalous behavior like the rumors people invent for drama. It started with very dry corporate issues. A massive commercial partner delayed payments for several huge shipments. Orders were abruptly canceled. Unsold inventory piled up in the warehouse, and the commercial bank loan payments came due. Then, suppliers started demanding cash. Thomas Hayes had done honest business his whole life. He was not a smooth talker, but everyone in the industry knew he kept his word. Martha was the same, meticulously managing the books and even advancing payroll to struggling workers out of her own pocket. But in business, sometimes the sky falls without warning. A massive contract collapsed. The other party stalled, while compound interest back home grew exponentially. The machines sat idle, but the bills did not. One night, Madeline sat on the balcony on the phone for a very long time. I was inside reviewing sales reports and only heard her lower her voice. She told her father not to liquidate the heavy machinery yet, and that she would check with her legal contacts to see if there was a loophole in the contract. I looked up and asked if it was the factory again. Madeline came inside, forcing a smile, and said a major partner had defaulted, and her parents were trying to restructure. I just mumbled an acknowledgement. Thinking about it now, that mumbling was so callous. My wife was terrified her parents were about to lose their entire life's work, and I reacted like I was hearing a weather report about light drizzle. Months later, the situation in South Bend grew critical. Her parents had to auction off equipment, lay off workers in waves, and sell a parcel of land behind their house just to hold off the bank and the suppliers. But despite all their maneuvering, a corporate debt of about $2.5 million remained. This was a registered commercial business loan. It had clear contracts, documentation, and specific guarantors. My family and I had not co-signed anything. We provided no collateral, and no joint marital assets were tied to it. Legally and practically, my family had zero obligation to shoulder it. I knew that. Madeline knew that. But my mother did not care about legal documents. To her, the mere fact that her daughter-in-law's family was associated with massive debt was a humiliating stain. She was terrified the neighbors would ask, terrified our relatives would gossip, and terrified people would say the Sterling family married a girl from a bankrupt, disgraced family. One afternoon, Madeline asked to go to South Bend to visit her parents. She was standing in the kitchen, her hands still smelling of garlic from marinating the chicken for our dinner. She told my mother she wanted to go down the next afternoon because her father was not feeling well, and her mother needed help organizing financial documents. My mother, who was chopping vegetables, slammed the knife down. Going back again? You just went there last week. Madeline paused but kept her tone polite. The factory issues aren't settled. I'll just go for the day and drive back late tomorrow night. My mother sneered. When a woman marries, she needs to know which house is her actual home. You can't just run back to your parents the second something happens. People looking in will think we can't even manage our own daughter-in-law. Madeline lowered her head. I don't mean it like that, Mom. My parents are in a crisis. I just want to help them sort things out. My mother's voice hardened. Help them with what? With money? With documents? You need to remember you are Arthur's wife now. Don't let their mess drag this family through the mud. I was standing right in the doorway. I heard everything. I should have walked in and told my mother that a daughter visiting her sick father is the most normal, decent thing in the world. But I stood completely still. I told myself my mother was just heated, and I would talk to her later in private. Human beings are amazing. We act like cowards, and then give it a beautiful name like waiting for the right moment. Dinner that night proceeded as usual. My father ate quietly, occasionally glancing at Madeline. My mother took a bite of food and casually dropped a bomb into the silence. This family has done business for over 20 years. We have never had a debt collector show up at our door. I just pray that whatever bad luck exists out there stays right where it is and doesn't follow anyone into this house. Madeline's fork lightly tapped her plate. The sound was tiny, but I heard it clearly. My father coughed roughly and told my mother to tone it down, noting that business has its ups and downs and nobody asks for it. My mother glared at him, declaring that while he might be sympathetic, she had to protect the family's reputation. She repeated her old phrase about looking at a family's foundation before picking a bride. Madeline set her fork down. Her hands were under the table, her voice trembling but soft. Mom, my parents are in debt because of a commercial loss, not because they did anything criminal. I haven't taken a single dime from this house to pay their debts. I respectfully ask that you do not speak of my parents that way. My mother let out a sharp laugh. Oh, so now you're talking back to me? I say 2 words and you defend them to the death. Blood really is thicker than water, isn't it? I saw the color drain from Madeline's face, but instead of defending her, I interjected. Come on, just eat your dinner. Mom is just venting. She doesn't mean anything by it. Madeline looked at me. There was no anger in her eyes. There was only profound sadness, and that sadness frightened me. But I avoided her gaze, took a bite of my food, and pretended the dinner was perfectly normal. Truly, the ultimate talent of an apathetic man is turning another person's deep wound into a minor inconvenience so he doesn't have to feel awkward. After that day, Clara started making snide remarks too. Whenever she came over and saw Madeline packing a tote bag to go to South Bend, she would smirk. Make sure there are no reporters or debt collectors outside the gates when you visit, Maddie. I'm just joking, of course. But social media is so fast these days. If a video goes viral, it might ruin our store's image. Madeline zipped her bag and calmly replied, I'm just visiting my parents. It won't affect anyone. Clara shrugged. I know you're sweet, but sweet people get dragged down by their parents' messes. Don't mind me. I'm just looking out for our family. Marcus, sitting nearby with a beer, immediately chimed in. Arthur, I'm telling you man to man, you have to be firm. Her family owes $2.5 million. If you don't establish boundaries now, the paperwork will get tangled, and you'll be the one taking the hit. I frowned. Their corporate debt has its own paperwork. It has nothing to do with us. Marcus smirked, his voice halfway between a joke and a dare. We know that, but the public doesn't read the fine print. They just hear about bankrupt in-laws and start rumors. A man who lets his wife do whatever she wants is going to have a hard time commanding respect later. My mother, hearing this, immediately agreed. Marcus is right. Arthur, don't be too soft. You love your wife, but you need to draw a hard line with the finances. One moment of weakness and this whole family's name is ruined. I stayed silent. My silence at that exact moment was the worst possible answer I could have given Madeline. She was standing not far away, holding a jacket she was about to put in the wash, her eyes fixed on the floor tiles. I knew she heard every word. That night in our room, Madeline sat folding laundry for a long time. I closed the door and whispered to her not to take my mother and Clara to heart. I said everyone was just stressed about her parents' situation and overreacting. Madeline stopped her hands and asked me, Do you think my parents did something unethical? I immediately said no. I knew her parents were honest people. Then why, she asked, when your mother insulted them, couldn't you say one single word to defend me? I choked on a very simple question that I could not answer. I sighed. I'm stuck in the middle. Just let it go for now. My mom is obsessed with saving face, and arguing with her is exhausting. Madeline looked at me for a long time. She finished folding my shirt and placed it neatly on the chair. I can tolerate it, Arthur, but please don't make me tolerate it all by myself. My chest tightened, but I quickly consoled myself by thinking that every marriage has its moments of friction. I didn't realize that was not a complaint. It was an SOS. And I, her husband, heard it and pretended not to understand. After she said that, I felt guilty for a few days. But then work swept me away. Year-end quotas, outstanding invoices, client meetings, everything piled up. I told myself it would blow over. Men like me back then had a very convenient disease. Whatever we didn't want to face, we labeled a minor issue. But in that house, the minor issues were growing thorns every single day. One Sunday afternoon, my mother invited Aunt Beatrice over for dinner. Aunt Beatrice was a widow, known for speaking her mind, but sometimes her bluntness cut people to the bone. Madeline got home from Chicago later than usual, but quickly changed clothes and went straight to the kitchen to help set the table and pour my father's soup first, so his stomach wouldn't hurt. Aunt Beatrice looked at Madeline and smiled. Madeline really is domestic. It's rare to see a modern wife get her hands dirty in the kitchen. Most girls nowadays just order Uber Eats and brag on Instagram about being independent. Madeline smiled warmly. I just do what I can, Aunt B. My mother taught me how to cook when I was little. My mother, who was serving the roast, changed her expression the moment she heard the words, my mother. She put her serving fork down, her voice feather light. Teaching you to cook is great. It's a shame she didn't teach you how to maintain an estate and not drown in debt. The atmosphere at the table snuffed out like a blown candle. Madeline stared down at her plate. My father glared at my mother. Why are you bringing that up at dinner? My mother laughed coldly. Just making a general observation. The old folks used to say, be poor but clean. I don't see how owing millions of dollars is clean. Aunt Beatrice hesitated, driven by the nosiness older relatives often have. She turned to Madeline. Is your family's situation stabilizing, honey? I heard the factory is in deep water. Madeline placed her hands in her lap, her voice remaining soft. My parents are slowly restructuring, Aunt B. Business has bad years, but they aren't running away from anyone. Clara, sitting next to her, laughed and grabbed a piece of bread. Maddie is right. Even if you're in debt, you have to be civilized about it. As long as nobody comes dragging their lawsuits to your husband's front door, right? Clara, I said quietly. What kind of thing is that to say? She pouted. I'm just kidding, Arthur. Maddie is so sweet she won't hold a grudge. Madeline looked at Clara and forced a smile. I know you're joking. But I saw her fingers gripping the edge of her napkin tight. I saw it. The tragedy is that seeing it and doing nothing is exactly the same as being blind. Eyes are only useful if they are connected to a conscience. At that moment, I had 20/20 vision and a pitch-black soul. Marcus took a sip of his drink and raised his voice. Honestly, every family is the same. When you marry a woman, you marry her family's culture. If the in-laws are solid, the husband looks good. If the in-laws are a mess, the husband gets dragged down. A man has to think 10 steps ahead. My mother nodded vigorously. Marcus is spot on. Arthur, are you listening? Love your wife. Fine, but you have to protect this family's honor. I was annoyed, but I was terrified of escalating the situation. I just muttered, let's just eat. The food is getting cold. Madeline quietly stood up to get more dressing for my father. He watched her walk away and sighed heavily, murmuring just loud enough for the table to hear. No matter how good the food is, bitter words make it hard to swallow. My mother slammed her fork down. If you want to defend your daughter-in-law, say it to my face. I am only looking out for this house. My father replied, looking out for the house doesn't mean pouring all your toxic paranoia onto the head of a girl. I thought that would stop my mother, but it didn't. She turned toward Madeline, her voice icy. You see that? You are heavily defended in this house. I speak the harsh truth, and suddenly I'm the villain. Madeline quickly said, I don't think you're a villain, Mom. I just ask that you don't bring up my parents like this in front of everyone. They are suffering enough. If they suffer, that's their own fault, my mother snapped. Whoever runs the business takes the fall. Do not let their misery crawl onto our family's doorstep. Madeline went completely pale. Not because she was being yelled at, but because my mother had essentially condemned her family's entire existence as a plague upon ours. My chest burned. I was about to say, Mom, that's enough. Just 3 words. But then Marcus looked at me with a half smirk. Arthur is too soft. If it were me, I would have made it clear from day one. Their money, their problem. No emotional entanglements. And just like that, I swallowed those 3 words. I was terrified that if I spoke up, my brother-in-law would view me as a weak man led around by his wife. Isn't that hilarious? I was more afraid of an arrogant outsider's opinion than the tears in my own wife's eyes. Life has a funny way of humiliating people, but a lot of the time, we buy the tickets to our own show. The dinner ended with the hollow clinking of silverware. Madeline cleared the table rapidly. I stood up to help carry a few plates, but then my phone rang with a work call, and I walked away to the living room. My mother sat drinking tea with Aunt Beatrice, complaining about how you have to thoroughly vet a daughter-in-law nowadays. My father went upstairs, clutching his stomach. I went into the kitchen and saw Madeline standing alone at the sink. Water was rushing over her soapy hands. On the counter sat the leftover roast, smelling beautifully of herbs, but my throat felt completely blocked. I stood behind her and said, Don't be sad. Mom has a temper, Aunt B was clueless, and Marcus just likes to hear himself talk. Madeline turned off the faucet. She didn't turn around immediately. After a long moment, she asked, Do you feel like I was just insulted? I paused for a few seconds. Those few seconds answered for me. Madeline turned to look at me. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. I don't need you to scream at your mother. I don't need you to make a scene in front of our relatives. All I needed was for you to say, when they were trashing my parents, that what they were saying wasn't fair. I exhaled loudly. But if I say that, Mom will accuse me of taking your family's side over ours. You know how she is. Madeline smiled a broken smile. And what about me? Whose side do I have to know to protect myself in this house? I froze. She grabbed a towel, dried her hands, and lowered her voice. Arthur, marrying into your family didn't mean I left my own parents outside the gates. I call your parents Mom and Dad. I sort every one of his pills. I prepare every foot bath for her. But my parents are treated like a stain. And you tell me not to overthink it. I said the thing that still makes me burn with shame today. Everyone was just talking. Why do you hold on to things so tightly? Madeline looked at me for a long time. This time, there wasn't just sadness in her eyes. There was exhaustion. The exhaustion of a person on a long journey who realizes the person walking beside them was never really there at all. She turned back to finish washing the last few plates. Her voice so quiet, I almost didn't hear it. I guess it's my fault for holding on. That night, Madeline still laid out my mother's towels, still prepped my father's pills, and still ironed my shirt. Outwardly, the house was as perfectly ordered as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had cracked. I just refused to give that crack a name. I thought that if we just woke up tomorrow, ate dinner, talked, and laughed a bit, everything would pass. I didn't know that some dinners never satisfy a hunger. They only make a woman realize that in a house full of people, she can still be utterly, completely alone. If you only hear about the tense dinners, you might think Madeline lived in a house of constant tears. That wasn't entirely true. There were peaceful days. Normal mornings with the sound of the coffee maker, the driveway being swept, and my mother asking where the store keys were. It is those normal days that make me the most remorseful. Because in those days, Madeline gave so much, and nobody bothered to count. Madeline always woke up before me. Michigan winters are brutal. She would put on a thin cardigan and go downstairs, turning on the stove quietly so as not to wake my parents. I had stomach issues, but a terrible habit of drinking black coffee on an empty stomach. Madeline knew I wouldn't listen to nagging, so she adapted. She would make a hot bowl of oatmeal or slip a soft bagel into my briefcase with a sticky note. Eat before the coffee. If you ruin your stomach, I won't feel sorry for you. I would laugh, shove the bagel in my bag, and leave. Sometimes I ate it, sometimes I forgot. The person receiving the care is often too lazy to even be grateful. Thinking about it now makes me want to shove my younger self into a blender. My father's stomach required a complex regimen of pills, some before meals, some after. He was sharp in business, but forgetful with his health. Madeline bought a massive daily pill organizer. Every Sunday evening, she sat at the dining table, reading the prescriptions and sorting the capsules. My father would look at her and smile, saying if she kept doing this, he would become a useless old man. Madeline replied that as long as he was healthy, he wasn't useless, and she needed him to guard the hardware store so my mother wouldn't scold her out of boredom. My father chuckled, and my mother yelled from the living room, asking if her daughter-in-law was making fun of her. Madeline laughed and said she would never dare. Those light-hearted jokes used to warm our entire house. When my mother's knees ached during weather shifts, Madeline bought herbs, Epsom salts, and eucalyptus, drying them out and boiling the perfect temperature water for a foot bath, carrying it all the way to my mother's favorite chair. My mother would say, "Don't make it too hot. My skin is sensitive." Madeline would crouch down, testing the water with her wrist. "It's perfect, Mom. Only soak for 15 minutes. Any longer isn't good for circulation." In those moments, my mother would soften. She'd look at Madeline and say, "Clara would never be this meticulous." I stood by the door listening, feeling proud. We didn't have kids yet, partly due to our careers and partly because Madeline wanted us to be more stable. When her family's crisis hit, even the fact that we were childless was used as a weapon against her. Humans really are thrifty with everything except the words they use to hurt each other. Our family hosted many gatherings. Madeline memorized exactly how to cater to every difficult relative, naturally and without complaint. Once, she sat on the bed sewing a loose button on my favorite pale blue dress shirt. I was lying down scrolling on my phone. Madeline squinted under the lamplight and asked, "Can you drive me down to South Bend this weekend? My mom says Dad has a bad cough and I want to check on him." I didn't look up from my phone. I have client meetings this weekend. Besides, Mom has been in a bad mood lately. If you keep running back there, she's going to complain. The needle stopped in Madeline's hand. She bit the end of the thread and said quietly, "I can take the Amtrak train down myself." I replied quickly, "It's not that I'm stopping you, but you need to pick your moments. Our house is stressed right now. If you keep running back to Indiana, Mom is going to think you prioritize your parents over us. Madeline looked up at me. My parents are sick, so I'm visiting them. How does that mean I prioritize anyone over anyone? I paused, then deployed my favorite excuse. I just want peace in the house. Madeline smiled a very small smile. You want peace in your house by making sure I never have peace in my heart? I got defensive because she was right. Proud men aren't afraid of being wrong. They are afraid of being accurately diagnosed. I sat up, my voice heavier. Stop twisting my words. I work hard all day. I don't want to come home to a headache. Madeline didn't say another word. She finished sewing the button, brushed off her hands, and hung the shirt on a hanger. Seeing a loose thread on the floor, she bent down to throw it in the trash. It was such a small movement, but I'll never forget it. No matter how broken a person is, they still keep your house clean, while you use your exhaustion as an excuse to trash their soul. After that day, Madeline rarely brought up going to South Bend. It wasn't that she stopped worrying. She just learned to stop begging me for things she had every right to do. I would see her standing in the backyard taking phone calls, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, Mom, I know. I'll send a little money for his medication, just don't tell Dad so he doesn't stress. Yes, I'm doing fine. I heard doing fine and never investigated further. Because investigating might require me to act? And I was far too comfortable doing nothing. My mother continued to treat Madeline's efforts as mandatory. One day, Madeline had a mild fever and looked pale, but still went to the kitchen to cook. My father told her to go rest and that he would order takeout. My mother yelled from the living room, "A little fever and she needs to lie down? Who is going to manage this house?" When I had 2 kids, I was still hauling bags of concrete at the store. Madeline just replied she would cook quickly and then rest. I was standing by the fridge. I drank a glass of water and said, "If you're tired, just make something simple." That was the extent of my care. Giving her permission to cook a simple meal while she was burning up. I was a monument to apathy, offering a torn umbrella in a thunderstorm and expecting gratitude. My family knew Madeline commuted to a corporate job in Chicago, but no one really understood what she did. To my mother, anything that didn't involve cash registers or physical inventory was just sitting in air conditioning, typing on a keyboard. Once, Madeline had to go on a 2-day business trip. My mother, looking at tile samples for a customer, looked up and asked, "You just do paperwork. Why are you always traveling?" Madeline held her laptop bag and politely explained, "My firm is auditing a supplier's data at an industrial park. I'm on the risk assessment team. I'll be back as soon as it's done." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "That gives me a headache. You're just going to sign some papers. Go, but come back early. There are chores to do." I was on the couch staring at my phone. I didn't ask her anything either. In my mind, her job was secure, boring, and corporate, while my job as a sales manager dealing with million-dollar contracts was the real high-pressure work. When you think you're the most important person in the room, everyone else's struggles look trivial. It's a disease that rots a marriage from the inside out. In reality, Madeline worked in supply chain risk management. Her job involved analyzing commercial contracts, vendor payment histories, and spotting fraudulent corporate data. One missed red flag, one forged document, and a company could lose millions. Madeline rarely talked about her job. Not to be mysterious, but because of strict NDAs. She kept her professional boundaries so tight that I sometimes found it annoying. One night, she was sitting at a small desk in our room, her laptop screen glowing. It was almost midnight, and her monitor was covered in sticky notes. I pulled the blankets up and asked, "Are you ever coming to bed? You have work tomorrow." She didn't look away from the screen. "I just have to review a few vendor codes that aren't matching up." I yawned. "Your company is weird. It's just paperwork. You act like you're investigating a murder." Madeline smiled faintly, her eyes exhausted. "Sometimes corporate fraud is more dangerous than a crime scene, Arthur. One wrong digit and the money is gone before anyone realizes." I laughed. "Sounds terrifying." "Hey, don't forget to iron my blue shirt for tomorrow. I'm meeting a massive client for the new construction project." She paused, then replied, "I already ironed it. It's hanging on the door." I casually grunted in acknowledgement, as if it were a law of physics. My wife is hunting down corporate fraud at midnight, and all I cared about was my dress shirt. If they sold tickets to view the world's most oblivious husband, I would have been the main exhibit. Clara never missed a chance to take a dig at her. One evening, Madeline got back from Chicago late. Before she even took off her boots, Clara, sitting on the sofa holding her baby, smirked. "Maddie, you are so busy. Audits and data and risk management. It sounds so fancy. I thought office jobs ended at 5 p.m. Madeline set her bag down. Every firm is different, Clara. Marcus laughed. Everyone has a fancy title these days. Risk analyst, supply chain specialist. Back in the day, we just called it a desk clerk. Now they make it sound like you work for the CIA. Clara giggled. Marcus, you're terrible. Don't be mad, Maddie, we're just teasing. Madeline didn't get mad. Or rather, she didn't let them see it. She just picked up her bag and said, I'll go change and start dinner. My mother yelled from the kitchen, Yeah, hurry up! The lettuce is washed, but the chicken isn't marinated yet. Nobody asked how her commute was. Nobody asked if she had eaten. A woman who worked a high-stress job all day and commuted over 100 miles was welcomed home with the chicken isn't marinated. A lovely brand of family affection, where you need permission just to feel exhausted. During one particularly busy week, Madeline was working late every night. I noticed her underlining a specific vendor name on a notepad multiple times. It was a heavy machinery supplier. The name sounded familiar, but I didn't think much of it. A few days later, I was prepping a pitch for my own company. As a commercial sales manager, I was pushing to use a new vendor for a massive industrial package. The vendor list was on our dining table. Madeline walked by and her eyes locked onto a specific name. She asked, Arthur, is your company pushing to contract with them? I followed her gaze. Yeah, their quotes are incredible. How do you know them? She stayed quiet for a few seconds. I've just seen the name in some files. You really need to have your legal team triple-check their payment guarantors and supply chain history. I frowned. What do you mean? Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. I can't give you details. But if this is a massive contract, you need your compliance department to run a deep background check on their banking history. Specifically, make sure they aren't using a shell company's credit rating. I laughed, a mix of mockery and annoyance. You act like it's my first day on the job. We have a whole legal department, CPAs, and executive approvals. You're being paranoid. Madeline looked at me, unsmiling. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just telling you to be careful. I shut my folder. Yeah, I got it, but let me handle my own company's business. Don't bring your paranoid audit brain into my deals. It just complicates things. Madeline pressed her lips together and gave a barely perceptible nod. Okay. She never mentioned it again. But I didn't know that the very next day, Madeline did exactly what her job required. She didn't call me privately. She didn't leak internal documents to her husband. She filed an official risk flag according to protocol, escalating the vendor to her department head, Harrison Caldwell, and the internal legal team. She detailed every discrepancy, overlapping corporate data, irregular payment histories, and loopholes in their financial backing. She did everything with cold, professional precision. But I believe that as she typed that report, she knew it would eventually impact me. When I came home that night, she was still staring at spreadsheets. I just told her to make sure my car keys were in the right spot for the morning. She looked up at me and quietly said they were in the drawer. She didn't demand gratitude. She didn't say, I'm saving your career, you arrogant fool. She just kept working, the same way she kept taking care of my family despite being treated like an outsider. It was only much later, when everything shattered, that I understood. Some women don't need to scream to prove their worth. They just do the right thing, live honorably, and maintain their dignity. It's just a tragedy when the man beside them is too blind to see it. Thanksgiving week that year, the air in Grand Rapids was freezing, the kind of cold that makes you crave a heavy, warm meal. The streets were packed with people buying turkeys, pies, and decorations. People passing our hardware store called out cheerful holiday greetings. Everywhere you looked, it felt like the holidays. Except in Madeline's heart. For her, I doubt she even knew what season it was anymore. She was up at dawn going to the grocery store. She wore an old beige winter coat, carrying heavy grocery bags before I was even fully awake. Before leaving, she placed my father's pill organizer on the table next to a glass of warm water. I squinted and asked why she was up so early. She zipped her coat and whispered that the store would be a madhouse later, and she needed to prep the turkey, the stuffing, and the casseroles. Then she had to set the formal dining table. I just mumbled and went back to sleep. I saw absolutely nothing wrong with that. A wife stressing over Thanksgiving while the husband sleeps in sounds completely normal, right? Normal to the point of being despicable. By late morning, the kitchen was blazing, the turkey was prepped, the cranberry sauce was simmering, and the green bean casserole was in the oven. Madeline was chopping vegetables for the stuffing, a few strands of hair falling across her sweaty cheek. My mother sat on a stool near the kitchen island, her bad knee propped up. She couldn't walk well that day, but her mouth worked perfectly fine. She directed traffic like a general. Don't cut the celery too thick. Our relatives have high standards. One look at the table and they know if the hostess is capable. Make sure you skim the fat off the gravy. Cloudy gravy is an embarrassment. Yes, Mom. Did you polish the silver and set the centerpieces? Yes, Mom, I did it this morning. My mother still wasn't satisfied. Where are the good china plates? Obviously, we use the good china for Thanksgiving. Don't put out the everyday ones. Madeline paused. I washed and dried them last night. They're ready. Every yes, Mom fell evenly, without argument, without complaint. But I saw the back of her shirt damp with sweat despite the cold weather. A hot kitchen, physical exhaustion, and a barrage of criticism. Nobody is a pressure cooker that can take heat forever without exploding. My father walked in from the storefront. Seeing Madeline lifting a heavy roasting pan, he stepped forward. Let me help you with that. Madeline quickly shook her head. No, Dad, the pan is scorching, and with your stomach, you shouldn't be straining yourself. My father frowned. I have a bad stomach. My arms aren't broken. You've been working since dawn. My mother immediately snapped. Let her do it. She's the daughter-in-law. If she doesn't handle the holiday dinner, who will? What will our guests think? My father glared at my mother, looking like he wanted to yell, but he held back. He turned to Madeline. If it's too heavy, call me. Madeline smiled gently. I've got it, Dad. That I've got it was like the lid on a boiling pot. It looked calm, but the pressure inside was building. I stood right there, saw the whole thing, and asked the most obnoxious question possible. Is there anything to eat? I'm starving. Madeline looked up at me. Just for a split second. Then she scooped a small bowl of mashed potatoes and handed it to me. Eat this for now. We'll have the big meal when the family gets here. I took the bowl, eating while scrolling on my phone. My mother looked pleased that her son was being served. Madeline went back to the stove. Hot oil from the pan popped and burned her wrist. She flinched, inhaling sharply, but didn't step away. How terrible does a man have to be to watch his wife get burned by cooking oil and just assume she's fine? Early in the afternoon, Madeline finished setting the table. She arranged the floral centerpieces perfectly. My father stood behind her and softly said, You have a real gift. Your mother in Indiana must have taught you well. Hearing her mother mentioned, Madeline's eyes softened. When I was little, my mom always made me set the Thanksgiving table. She said no matter how hard times got, a family needs to gather around a beautiful table to remember what we're grateful for. My father nodded. Your mother is a wise woman. My mother, walking in from the hallway, caught the end of the conversation and cleared her throat loudly. Gratitude is great. I just hope whoever is having a hard time keeps it to themselves, so they don't ruin other people's holidays. Madeline lowered her head, adjusting the last flower. Yes, Mom. I heard it clearly from the stairs. I pretended I didn't. I went to our room to change my shirt, telling myself it was a holiday and I shouldn't start a fight. It is a brilliant human invention, preserving peace by forcing someone else to swallow their humiliation. By late afternoon, Clara and Marcus arrived. Clara wore a brand new designer coat, carrying an expensive box of imported chocolates. Marcus held a bottle of whiskey, laughing loudly as he walked in. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Brought the good stuff. Me, Arthur, and Dad can crack this open later. My mother beamed. Oh, the house finally feels alive now that you two are here. Clara looked at the massive feast on the table and gasped. Wow, Maddie, you went all out. If I posted this on Instagram, everyone would be jealous of our family. Madeline, arranging the silverware, just smiled. You're exaggerating. Marcus pulled out a chair, looked around, and casually dropped a bomb. Well, it's a blessing our family has a full table this year. With the economy the way it is, a lot of businesses are going under. I'm sure for some families, Thanksgiving is pretty miserable. No one said the name Hayes, but everyone knew exactly who that missile was aimed at. Madeline's hands froze. I saw it. My father saw it. My mother acted oblivious and said, All right, have a seat. Aunt Beatrice and the others will be here soon. I had come down wearing a clean shirt, smelling of cologne. The table was stunning. The golden turkey sat in the middle, surrounded by steaming side dishes. Madeline stood in the kitchen, pale from exhaustion, and asked, Are you ready? Wash your hands, we're almost set. I should have asked if she was okay. I should have told her to sit down while I helped. Instead, looking at the arriving relatives, I said, Make sure everything is perfect when the guests sit down. We don't want anything missing. Madeline looked at me. No anger, no resentment. Just a very brief, silent pause. Then she softly said, "Okay." As the relatives filled the living room and the food was brought out, Madeline's phone suddenly vibrated on the kitchen counter. It was her mother calling from South Bend. Madeline quickly wiped her hands on a towel and stepped out onto the freezing back patio to answer. I watched her, feeling a knot of annoyance, terrified this call was going to drag her family's drama into our Thanksgiving dinner. As soon as she put the phone to her ear, her face changed. "Mom? How is Dad?" The freezing wind whipped through the patio door, making the stove flames flicker. Madeline stood frozen, gripping the phone, her other hand clutching her sweater. Inside, my mother was laughing with relatives, but her eyes had already locked onto the patio, narrowing sharply. "Mom, slow down. Which hospital is he at? What is his blood pressure?" Hearing the word hospital, my heart sank. My father-in-law had a history of hypertension, and the stress of the collapsing factory and the massive debt had been eating him alive. But before I could feel any sympathy, my mother yelled from the living room. "Madeline, who are you talking to out there? Everyone is waiting to eat." Madeline stepped back inside, her voice small but urgent. "Mom, I'm listening. What confirmation papers?" Just hearing the word papers, my mother marched over. She didn't care about the context. The word triggered her paranoia. On the other end, Martha was speaking rapidly. Madeline listened, her face draining of all color. "I understand. If it's about the property in my name before the marriage, we need to clarify it so the bank doesn't confuse it with my marital assets." "Yes, I'll come down and sign it. Don't worry, Mom. I won't let this drag Arthur into anything." My mother snapped instantly. "Marital assets? Sign what? Explain yourself." Madeline lowered the phone slightly, trying to stay calm. "Mom, my mother said the commercial bank is requesting a quitclaim deed and asset separation forms for property I owned before I married Arthur. They are restructuring the corporate loan, and they need to legally isolate my premarital assets so it doesn't bleed into my joint finances with Arthur. I just need to sign it to keep our family safe. It has nothing to do with borrowing money." My mother let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Oh, that sounds lovely. Banks, assets, signing papers, it's all a trap. Your family owes $2.5 million, and now they want to drag you down to sign things? How do I know you signing something won't put a lien on my house?" Madeline choked back a sob. "Mom, I work in risk management. I know exactly how these contracts work. I am not co-signing a loan. I am not offering collateral. This is literally a legal firewall to protect my assets. I am confirming my premarital property." Clara stepped in from the dining room, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Maddie, you say that, and we want to believe you. But when it comes to money and legal documents, you never know. What if your family secretly puts you down as a guarantor because they're desperate?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink. "Arthur, you have to be smart here. Paperwork is tricky, and a moment of weakness for her parents could end up bankrupting you." I stood between the kitchen and the dining room. I could see all the relatives pausing their conversations. Some pretended to adjust their napkins, some looked at the floor, but every single ear was dialed in. People are bizarre. Other people's family drama makes the turkey taste better. My face burned. Not because my wife was being falsely accused, but because I was terrified of looking like a fool in front of my extended family. Looking back, my pride was absolutely pathetic. Madeline was still holding the phone. Her mother must have heard the shouting, because Madeline quickly said, "Mom, don't worry. Let me talk to Arthur. Take care of Dad, I'll call you right back." She hung up. As soon as she did, my mother stared daggers at Madeline's purse resting on a kitchen stool. "Do you have any other papers in that bag? Let me see it." Madeline froze. "Mom, that is my personal purse." My mother raised her voice, ensuring the entire house heard. "Personal? What is personal in this house? You are a daughter-in-law here. If it involves finances, I have a right to know." My father slammed his hand on the table and stood up. "Eleanor, you are crossing the line. Why are you digging through her purse?" My mother whipped around. "You shut up. You're so soft that people walk all over you. If I don't check, we'll end up saddled with $1 million debt before we even know it." Madeline hugged her purse to her chest, her eyes red. "I have never taken a single cent from this house to pay my parents' debt. I have not signed any guarantees. Please." "You're lying!" my mother shouted. "I'm not lying. I am telling the truth." The room felt suffocating. I looked at Madeline, who was desperately trying to stand tall. I looked at my mother, whose face was red with rage. I looked at Clara and Marcus, waiting for me to step up. A man's ego, when placed in front of a crowd, can turn him into a monster very quickly. My mother lunged forward and snatched the purse right out of Madeline's hands. Madeline didn't fight back. She just took a step back. My mother dug through it. She pulled out a wallet, tissues, some lip balm, and then a folded piece of paper from the side pocket. It was a bank wire receipt. My mother's eyes lit up like a prosecutor who just found the murder weapon. What is this? A wire transfer to South Bend for $500. And you said you weren't sending them money? You are funneling our money to pay off their bankrupt factory. Madeline stared at her in disbelief. That is for my father's hospital copay and medication. That came from my personal checking account. It is my own corporate bonus. It is not out of my joint account with Arthur. Arthur knows I keep a separate account for my own expenses. I did know. I knew Madeline kept a portion of her own salary to buy things for herself, to buy gifts for my mother, to buy shirts for me, and to help her parents occasionally. But right then, every eye in the room was on me. I felt like I was on trial. Marcus spoke slowly. Today it's $500 for a hospital bill. Tomorrow it's $50,000 for a lawyer. Next week it's putting your house up for collateral. Everything starts small, Arthur. My mother threw the receipt on the counter. You are incredible. You talk so cleanly, but you're siphoning money behind our backs. We feed you and house you, and you take our wealth to fix your parents' failures? Madeline's voice trembled. I work a full-time corporate job. I have the right to help my father when he is in the hospital using my own money. I didn't ask this family for a single dime. You're still arguing? I'm not arguing. I am defending my dignity. The silence in the room was deafening. I saw Madeline's hands gripping the edge of the granite counter. The crumpled wire receipt lay next to a beautiful bowl of cranberry sauce. The Thanksgiving feast was steaming, but no one had any appetite left. It was a holiday, but it felt colder than a graveyard. She spoke slowly, enunciating every word. Arthur, I have never hidden anything from you to hurt this family. My parents are in debt because their business failed, and it is documented. I did not co-sign. I did not pledge our house. The money I sent was for my father's medical bills, from my own salary. I explained this, but to your family, I am a thief. My mother crossed her arms and sneered. Talk is cheap. Black ink on white paper is one thing, but a deceitful heart is what ruins a family. Madeline turned to my mother, her voice still polite. Mom, I have been your daughter-in-law for years. You don't have to love me, but I beg you not to treat me like a criminal. I have never done anything to harm this house. Clara stepped forward, placing a hand on my mother's shoulder, playing the peacemaker. Maddie, don't speak to Mom like that. She's just worried. We have a business reputation to uphold. It's fine that you love your parents, but you have to understand our paranoia. Madeline looked at Clara. Understand your paranoia by letting you dig through my purse in front of our entire family? Clara feigned hurt and sighed. You're making this so difficult. If you didn't do anything wrong, why are you so upset? That comment was pure poison. You violate someone's dignity, humiliate them, and then ask why they're crying. It's a special kind of cruelty. Marcus set his whiskey glass down. Arthur, I'm going to be real with you. This isn't about $500. This is about principles. You let this slide today, and tomorrow you lose control of your marriage. The man of the house has to put his foot down. A gentle wife is great, but gentle doesn't mean she gets to run the show. Hearing the phrase man of the house made my face burn. I knew Marcus was baiting me. I knew it. But knowing it and falling for it anyway is worse than ignorance. At that moment, my pathetic ego loomed larger than my love for my wife. I stopped looking at Madeline as the woman who had spent 12 hours cooking this meal, the woman who sorted my father's pills, the woman who rubbed my mother's aching knees. I looked at her as a PR crisis. I needed to squash in front of an audience. My father leaned heavily on the table. Let's calm down. It's Thanksgiving. Let's hear her out. My mother snapped at him. You always defend her. Are you going to wait until the repo men show up at our door before you wake up? My father grimaced. You're being hysterical. She isn't that kind of person. My mother pointed a finger right at Madeline. You think you know her heart? Her family owes over $2 million. Who wouldn't be desperate? What happens the day she decides her parents are more important than us? Madeline closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, she looked straight at me. She didn't look at my mother, or Clara, or Marcus. Just me. Arthur, tell me, do you believe me? The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock and the wind outside. A very simple question. Do you believe me? We had been married for years. I should have answered instantly. But I looked at my mother, who was staring at me, demanding loyalty. I looked at Clara, waiting to see if her brother had a spine. I looked at Marcus, smirking, ready to judge me. I was trapped by their gazes, and with my own 2 hands, I pushed my wife off the cliff. I said, I just want things to be transparent. Your family's debt is their problem. Don't drag my parents down with them. Madeline stood perfectly still. As those words left my mouth, my father collapsed back into his chair, clutching his stomach as if he had been punched. My mother exhaled a breath of triumph, having finally heard the words she wanted. Clara looked down, a tiny smile playing on her lips. Marcus nodded approvingly. Arthur is right. Madeline stared at me for a long time. I couldn't look deeply into her eyes, because what was in them wasn't just sadness anymore. It looked like a light had been permanently extinguished. She asked, Do you honestly think I would drag your parents down? I swallowed hard. I'm not saying you would do it on purpose, but this family cannot afford the scandal. Scandal? Madeline repeated the word, her voice turning hoarse. My parents' business failed. They aren't hiding. They aren't scamming anyone. I work a corporate job to send my sick father money for his medication. I explained the legal documents. And in your eyes, my existence is a scandal? I got angry, partly because she was absolutely right, and partly because everyone was still watching. I lost my last shred of empathy. I am exhausted, Maddie. It is Thanksgiving and you are bringing all this Indiana drama into our house. You need to remember your place. You are a daughter-in-law here. Madeline smiled, a tiny, faint smile that sent a chill down my spine. Because I am a daughter-in-law here? Does that mean I am no longer my parents' daughter? I couldn't answer. My mother stood up abruptly, pointing toward the front door. Don't say another word. If your heart is so tied to that bankrupt family of yours, then go back to them for Thanksgiving. This house does not keep people whose loyalty is with a sinking ship. My father roared, Eleanor! But my mother wouldn't stop. She leaned over the island, her voice shaking with rage. You ruined my family's holiday. If you love your parents so much, leave. Go back and sign your papers. Go pay for their medicine. Go drown in their debt. Do not stand in my kitchen and poison my Thanksgiving dinner. Madeline stopped looking at my mother. She looked back at me, as if offering me one final, desperate chance to be a man. Arthur. Do you feel the same way as your mother? My heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew that if I just said no, I could save everything. But that cheap, fragile male ego won. I turned my face away, my voice dry and harsh. You've upset Mom enough. If you think your parents are more important than your husband's family, then you should leave. Madeline took a half step back. Nobody pushed her, but I know that sentence physically shoved her out of the house. The feast in front of us was untouched, but in that moment, I threw away the most precious thing the Sterling family ever had. After I spoke, the silence in the kitchen was absolute. No one was smiling. No one was reaching for a fork. The golden turkey, the warm stuffing, the cranberry sauce. It all looked profoundly desolate. It was as if every ounce of warmth in that house had been vacuumed up by my words. Madeline stood in the middle of the kitchen, her arms hanging by her sides. She didn't cry. If she had cried, if she had screamed, if she had thrown that wire receipt in my face, I might have been able to justify myself by saying she was being dramatic. But she just stood there in total silence, and that silence was terrifying. She looked at me and asked very quietly, Arthur, do you really want me to go? I remember that question vividly. I remember the tone of her voice. It wasn't soft like it usually was, and it wasn't angry. It was the voice of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, turning around one last time to see if anyone was going to grab their hand. My father gripped the edge of the table, his voice shaking. Arthur, don't be a fool. You are husband and wife. Close the door and talk this out privately. My mother snapped back. Let him speak. A man needs to have a backbone. He can't just let his wife walk all over him. Clara stood next to my mother, looking slightly pale, but she didn't say a word to stop it. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching me like he was waiting for a performance. That look from him wasn't worth a single cent, yet I, a grown man, let it dictate my conscience. I swallowed hard. My mind was full of stupid, chaotic thoughts. My relatives are watching. My mom is furious. My brother-in-law thinks I'm weak. I would lose face if I backed down. And my wife's pain was shoved to the very bottom of that list. I said, yeah, you can leave. Tonight is fine. Tonight is fine. The moment those 3 words left my mouth, I saw Madeline blink. Just a single blink. No tears fell. No gasp. But I knew something inside her broke, completely and silently. My father cursed under his breath. My mother even hesitated for a second. She probably didn't think I would take it that far, but the pride had already been escalated, and no one was willing to back down. When a rope is pulled too tight, it snaps, and my family all pulled together to snap it as fast as possible. Madeline gave a tiny nod. I understand. She turned and walked toward the stairs. She didn't run, she didn't storm off. Every step was slow, deliberate, and agonizingly calm. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to her footsteps. Every step felt like a hammer to my chest, but I didn't move an inch. My mother muttered, "If she wants to go, let her go. Let's see how long she lasts back there." My father turned to her, his voice choked. "Shut your mouth. Are you happy now?" My mother opened her mouth to argue, but seeing the look on my father's face, she stayed quiet. Clara bent down to pick up a dropped napkin. Marcus, for the first time all evening, didn't say a word. I think the entire family realized this was no longer just about putting a daughter-in-law in her place. A few minutes later, Madeline came back down. In her hand was a small, brown canvas duffel bag. I recognized it as the bag she used for short business trips. It probably held a few changes of clothes, her laptop, and her toiletries. It looked so light that it made my heart ache. A woman who had lived in this house for years, and when she was kicked out, her entire life fit into a single carry-on bag. It turns out, a person can pack up an entire marriage into a few outfits when their heart is completely exhausted. She walked past the dining room, but didn't head straight for the front door. She walked into the kitchen. My mother watched her, frowning. "What are you doing now?" Madeline didn't answer. She checked the lid on the simmering soup, turning the burner off. She took a spoon and skimmed the last bit of fat off the gravy, just as my mother had demanded earlier. She dried her hands. She walked over to the side table and adjusted my father's pill organizer, making sure it was perfectly aligned. She looked at my father and spoke in her usual polite tone. "Your stomach medication is sorted through Sunday. Please take the yellow pill after breakfast, and the white one before dinner. Don't mix them up, Dad." My father covered his eyes with his hand. He couldn't look at her. "Maddie, I'm so sorry." Madeline shook her head. "Don't say that, Dad. Take care of your health." She turned to my mother, who was standing stiffly by the counter. Madeline took a bottle of eucalyptus oil from the cabinet and placed it on the island. "When your knees ache, just soak them early. Don't do it too late at night, the temperature drop will make it worse. Rub this oil on after you dry your feet, not while they're still wet." My mother pressed her lips together. She looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. I bet in her entire life, she never imagined that a daughter-in-law she had just kicked out would stop to leave instructions for her foot bath. Before coming down, Madeline had gone into our bedroom one last time. I only found out later that she had hung my pale blue dress shirt, the one I planned to wear for an important meeting the next week, on the back of the door. The collar was perfectly ironed, the missing button sewn back on tightly. On my nightstand, she left a small sticky note. Her handwriting was as neat and steady as she was. "Dad, remember your pills. Mom, don't soak your feet too late. Arthur, please eat a bagel before you drink your coffee. I'm going back to take care of my own family. Have a peaceful Thanksgiving." I read that note later and my throat swelled shut. Yet, standing there in the hallway, I couldn't say a word to stop her. Madeline picked up her bag. My father took a step forward. "It's freezing outside. Let me call you an Uber to the station." Madeline replied softly, "I already ordered a car, Dad. Don't stand in the draft." I flinched. While my entire family was caught up in a storm of anger, Madeline had calmly ordered her own ride, not waiting for me to change my mind, not begging to stay. I realized that the moment I said "tonight is fine," she knew there was nothing left to wait for. As she reached the door, I called out, "Maddie." She stopped, but she didn't turn completely around. I could have said I was sorry. I could have told her not to leave. I could have walked over, taken that little brown bag, and slapped myself for my own cheap ego. But I just stood there, my mouth dry, my mind blank, and I asked a completely pointless question. "Are you really leaving?" Madeline turned to look at me and gave a very faint, hollow smile. "You just told me to." I was speechless. A horn honked in the driveway. Madeline bowed her head respectfully to my parents. "Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Mom." Then she walked out. The door clicked shut very softly. So softly, it didn't even rattle the glass. But in my entire life, I have never heard a sound heavier than that door closing. That night, no one in our family could eat the Thanksgiving dinner. The feast sat there. The turkey grew cold, the gravy congealed, the casseroles lost their steam. My mother told Clara to pack up the leftovers, But even my mother only took 2 bites before setting her fork down. My father went upstairs early. As he walked past me, he said exactly one thing. "You just did something incredibly cruel." I stood there. At that moment, I was still prideful. I still thought my father was just being overly sympathetic. I still lied to myself, thinking Madeline would just be mad for a few days, and maybe after the weekend, I would text her and she would come back. Men who are in the wrong always naively believe they have plenty of time. It is a childish arrogance that deserves to be slapped awake by reality. The next morning, I woke up late. Out of habit, I reached across the bed. The space where Madeline usually slept was ice cold. I looked at the back of the door. My pale blue shirt hung there perfectly. The collar crisp, the buttons secure, as if it had never been broken. I wore that shirt to the store. My mother tried to keep a brave face. She told customers and neighbors that Madeline had gone to Indiana for a family emergency and would be back soon. Aunt Beatrice gave my mother a long look, but didn't ask questions. But her eyes made me uncomfortable. They weren't malicious, they just looked like they understood far too much. My father was incredibly quiet. When people wished him a happy holiday weekend, he just nodded. When people asked where his daughter-in-law was, he just drank his coffee. I texted Madeline that afternoon. "Did you make it home safe?" No reply. The next day, I texted again. "Mom and Dad are asking about you. Call me when you have a minute." Still no reply. By Sunday, I started getting annoyed. I told myself she was being purposely stubborn. I typed another message. "Let's talk. It's the holidays. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." I stared at the screen. Delivered, but not read. No calls. After that, her phone went straight to voicemail. My mother saw me holding my phone and asked, "Did she text back?" I shook my head. She scoffed. "Just let her sit in her parents' mess for a few days. Don't you dare apologize first. A man has to have some self-respect." My father, reading the newspaper, slammed his coffee mug down. "Self-respect doesn't mean breaking your wife's heart." My mother whirled on him. "You're still defending her. She walked out on Thanksgiving night and humiliated us." My father looked at her, his voice exhausted. "You chased her out. Arthur told her to leave. She left. And now you're mad that she hasn't come crawling back?" My mother's face turned red. I was angry. Everyone says things when they're angry. "And a harsh word spoken in anger can freeze a person's heart for a lifetime," my father replied. "Do you think words just evaporate into thin air?" I looked at my father. For the first time in years, he didn't back down from my mother's glare. A man who had yielded his whole life to keep the peace, finally realizing there was no peace left, and his words cut like a knife into the table. That Monday, I drove down to South Bend to find Madeline. I say find, but I went with a mindset half hoping to see her and half terrified of the embarrassment. I pulled up to her parents' house. The gate was locked. The driveway was empty, and the potted plants on the porch were dead. A neighbor told me Thomas Hayes was still in a rehab facility recovering from a heart attack, and Martha had rented a small apartment near the hospital to take care of him and handle the lawyers. They didn't know the address. I stood by the gate for a long time, calling Madeline's number again. Still straight to voicemail. I could have asked around more. I could have driven to the local hospitals. I could have called her old friends in Indiana. But I got in my car and drove back to Michigan. I told myself she just needed more time. In reality, I was a coward. I was terrified of facing my in-laws, terrified of bowing my head, terrified of them asking me how I had treated their daughter. Weeks passed. The house was miserable. There were still customers, still holiday sales, still noise in the storefront. But the living space in the back was disjointed. The good china she had washed, no one knew which cabinet it belonged in. The floral centerpieces wilted because my mother forgot to change the water. My father took his pills at the wrong times and spent evenings clutching his stomach in agony. I asked him, "Dad, does it hurt?" He didn't look at me. "How did Maddie tell me to take these?" I froze. I didn't remember. Her pill organizer was there, but I didn't know which one was with food and which was on an empty stomach. I picked up the sticky note she left and read it, my throat tightening. My father looked at my hands and whispered, "She remembered every single day, and no one in this house can remember once." My mother's knees flared up terribly as the December snow set in. She tried to make her own Epsom salt bath, but she made the water too hot and soaked for an hour, ending up with red, burning skin. I told her to use the eucalyptus oil. She tore through every cabinet in the bathroom and couldn't find it. Finally, she remembered the bottle Madeline had placed on the kitchen island the night she left. My mother held the bottle, her hands stopping midair. She sat down on a chair in silence for a long time before she opened the cap. Even Clara's visits were a disaster. She tried to cook dinner one night to help out, but she rushed it. The soup was horribly salty, and the chicken was burnt. Marcus took one bite and chuckled. Definitely missing Maddie's cooking, aren't we? Clara glared at him. Eat it or don't, but shut up. My mother immediately snapped. We can survive without her. You act like the sky is falling over a meal. No one said anything, but my mother barely ate her own food. 2 months passed. Madeline's room remained exactly as she left it. Her hairbrush on the vanity, a few notebooks in the drawer, her brown scarf draped over a chair. No one dared to pack it away, and no one dared to talk about it. As for me, every evening I came home from work, I looked toward the kitchen, half expecting Madeline to walk out wearing an apron, asking me how my day was. But the house only answered with the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of reheated takeout. It took me nearly 2 months to understand a very simple truth. Madeline wasn't throwing a tantrum. She was actually walking out of my life. But even then, I hadn't dared to name my own sin. I kept telling myself it was a misunderstanding, a moment of holiday stress, a bad fight. I hadn't admitted that the person who forced my wife out wasn't my mother, Clara, or Marcus. The person who said the final words was me. Since Madeline left, my father had grown incredibly withdrawn. He used to be quiet, but it was the quiet of an observant man. Now, his silence was heavy, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. One freezing night, I came home to find him curled up on the armchair, clutching his stomach. On the table was a blister pack of pills, scattered, next to a glass of cold water. I dropped my briefcase. Dad, are you okay? Why didn't you call me? He grimaced. If I called you, would you know which pill to give me? I stood frozen. He wasn't yelling, but the question hit me in a place I had no defense for. I picked up the pills, reading the microscopic text. Before, Madeline had everything separated into little compartments. A task so small, our family treated it like it was nothing, until it was gone, and it became an insurmountable crisis. My mother walked out of the kitchen with a towel. Just take whatever, Robert. Stomach pills are all the same. Stop acting like it's a tragedy. My father looked up at her. If taking whatever worked, why did the doctor write a prescription? My mother faltered but kept her stubborn tone. We can survive without her. Are we going to be paralyzed because we're missing one daughter-in-law? My father put the pills down. He looked straight at my mother, his voice low but razor-sharp. We can survive, Eleanor. But can't you see we are surviving miserably? The living room went dead silent. My mother pressed her lips together and looked away, but I knew she heard every word. Her knees had been killing her for weeks. She ate less, and every night I saw her quietly rubbing that eucalyptus oil on her joints without saying a word. I stepped forward to get him some warm water, but he waved me off. Sit down, Arthur. I sat on the coffee table facing him. It had been a long time since he used that tone with me. It was the tone of a father who had run out of patience for excuses. Arthur, he asked, how long are you going to let this go on? I looked down. I texted her. Her phone is off. I drove down to South Bend, but her parents' house is locked up. My father smiled a sad, bitter smile. You look for your wife the way a delivery driver looks for a wrong address. You ring the bell, nobody answers, so you drive home. You call that looking? My throat closed up. My mother immediately jumped in. He tried. Arthur tried. Maddie is being ridiculously stubborn. We reach out and she ignores us. Does that make her completely innocent? My father turned to her. How do you want her to answer you? On Thanksgiving night, you pointed at the door. Arthur told her to get out. She left. And now you're blaming her for not turning around? My mother's face flushed. I was angry. Everyone gets angry. And one moment of your anger froze a person's life. My father shot back. You think you can just erase it because you were mad? I looked at my father. The man who had compromised his entire life to keep his wife happy was finally putting his foot down, and every word hit like a hammer. Right then, Clara and Marcus walked in with their toddler. Clara instantly felt the tension. She set down a bag of groceries and forced a laugh. What's going on? Dad, is your stomach acting up again? I didn't answer. My mother walked back into the kitchen to avoid the conflict. Clara looked at the pills on the table and blurted out, I guess everyone is just struggling without Maddie. But honestly, she's being pretty dramatic. She just left and hasn't even called to check on Mom and Dad. My father's head snapped up. Clara. His voice wasn't loud, but Clara shut her mouth instantly. He looked at his daughter, his eyes red with anger and grief. Do not call someone's profound trauma dramatic. She was driven out of this house. She didn't go on a vacation. How dare you speak about it so lightly? Clara went pale. I just meant. I didn't mean anything by it. Nobody in this house ever means anything by it, my father shouted. Your mother didn't mean anything by it, you didn't mean anything by it, Marcus didn't mean anything by it. And finally, Madeline packs a tiny bag and walks out into the freezing night. So whose fault was it? No one answered. Marcus coughed awkwardly, trying to intervene like he always did. Dad, honestly, there are two sides to this. Maddie taking money and legal documents back to her family. My father snapped his head toward Marcus, his gaze so intense that Marcus actually took a step back. Marcus, when it comes to the Sterling family, you will stop trying to teach us lessons. The room was paralyzed. Since Marcus married Clara, my father had never spoken a harsh word to him. Marcus was used to playing the corporate guru, handing out advice on boundaries and masculinity. But that day, he just looked down, adjusted his watch, and didn't utter another syllable. My father looked at everyone in the room. Do any of you know how much Madeline did for this house? My medication, your mother's knees, every holiday meal, Arthur's clothes. She even polished the silver and set the table single-handedly. She never demanded praise, so you all assumed she had no value. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway, her eyes red, but she stubbornly said, I never said she didn't work hard, but the issue with her family owes money to a bank. My father cut her off. There are contracts, there are courts, there are people responsible for that debt. But what does our family owe her? Is there a ledger for that? My mother fell silent. My father pushed himself up from the chair, swaying slightly. I rushed to help him, but he brushed my hand away. He spoke slowly and heavily. The biggest debt this family has isn't the $2.5 million in Indiana. The biggest debt this family has is our debt of gratitude to Madeline. That sentence dropped into the living room like a shattered plate. No one dared to pick up the pieces. I sat there, stunned. Before that, I had convinced myself my only mistake was a moment of anger. But hearing my father, I realized my failure didn't start on Thanksgiving. It started years ago. It started every time I told her to just bear with it. Every time I ignored my mother's insults. Every time I treated her love like a free subscription. Clara sat down, looking at the floor. Marcus was dead silent. My mother turned her face away, wiping her eyes quickly, hoping no one saw, and my father sank back into his chair, breathing heavily. I poured him a glass of warm water. This time, he took it. He whispered, You have to find her, Arthur. You have to apologize to her. He looked at me for a long time. And you apologize not to drag her back here to be our maid again. If that's what you want, don't even go. You go because you know you committed a terrible wrong. I bowed my head. My face burned with shame. Deep down, I wasn't even sure if I wanted her back because I loved her, or because my life was falling apart without her. Human beings are pathetic. Even our guilt is coated in selfishness. It sits at the bottom of the soul like sediment in a teacup. As long as you don't stir it, it looks clear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the room we used to share, staring at the chair where she used to sew my buttons. Out in the hallway, I heard my mother pacing softly. She probably couldn't sleep either. My father coughed a few times. The entire house felt like a terminally ill patient, no fever, no screaming, but decaying from the inside. The next morning, as soon as I got to the office, my desk phone rang. It was the VP's secretary, sounding frantic. Arthur, get to conference room B right now. There is a massive red flag on the supply chain contract you're pushing. I stood in the hallway, my blood running cold. I didn't know yet that the name Madeline Hayes was about to be spoken in that room, nor did I know that the wife I considered a liability had quietly saved me from a career-ending disaster. I walked into the conference room, my stomach still burning from lack of sleep. Life has impeccable timing for delivering its hardest hits. Just as you are stumbling, it sticks a foot out to trip you. The director of sales, the head of legal, a guy named Harrison, the chief financial officer, and 2 risk analysts were already seated. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. On the projector screen was the corporate profile of the industrial vendor my team had been negotiating with for months. They had great pricing, fast delivery, and beautiful paperwork. I thought this contract was going to make my quarterly bonus. Harrison, the head of legal, pulled out a chair and looked right at me. Arthur, Your team is the commercial lead on this vendor, correct? I nodded. Yes, we've vetted their quotes and delivery capacity. What's the issue? Harrison slid a thick file across the table. The issue is their payment guarantor and financial backing. If we had signed this tomorrow like you wanted, our $2 million advance payment would have been routed to a shell company with zero legal recourse for recovery. The estimated risk exposure is around $2.45 million. Hearing that number made my spine freeze. $2.45 million. The CFO nodded grimly. Not to mention the penalties we'd pay our own clients for failing to deliver the equipment. Arthur, if your team pushes a vendor through without catching this level of fraud, the liability falls directly on your head. My face flushed hot. I wasn't afraid of sales quotas, but being held responsible for a multi-million-dollar fraudulent contract could cost me my job, my industry reputation, and land me in a massive lawsuit. I flipped through the file, trying to stay calm. But legal cleared them in the initial round. They had bank guarantees, financial statements, and shipping manifests. A junior analyst named Tyler spoke up from the end of the table. They had the paperwork, Arthur, but it was forged. When we ran a deep-level cross-audit, we found identical data strings linked to a blacklisted company. I asked immediately, who flagged the data string? Tyler looked at his laptop. His voice was completely casual, but the name he read out made the room spin. The initial audit flag was raised by Madeline Hayes, a senior analyst over at the third-party logistics firm we use for background checks. She submitted the risk report right before the holidays. Her department head confirmed it yesterday, which is why we caught it this morning. I sat perfectly still. For a moment, the conference room faded away. The hum of the AC, the glowing screen, the executives talking it all blurred. The only thing echoing in my head was Madeline Hayes. I asked, my voice cracking, "Who did you say?" Tyler looked confused. Madeline Hayes. Do you know her? I didn't answer right away. Do you know her? What a humiliating question. She was my wife. I slept in the same bed as her, ate her food, wore the shirts she ironed, took the medication she organized. And yet, her actual career, her brilliance, and what she did behind the scenes, I knew less about it than a junior analyst in a conference room. Harrison looked at me closely. Arthur, are you all right? I swallowed hard. She is my wife. The room went dead silent. Tyler looked panicked, and the CFO raised an eyebrow. Harrison stared at me for a long time, as if he was finally putting the pieces of a puzzle together. He spoke slower this time. Then you should know how professional this report is. She didn't contact you privately. She didn't leak our internal data. She flagged the risk exactly according to protocol. Her report escalated to an official warning, which is the only reason we had the legal grounds to freeze the advance payment this morning. I stared at the bullet points on the projector screen. Duplicated data entries, discrepancies in payment histories, excluded liability clauses in bank guarantees, forged project photos. Every line was cold, clear, and sharp as a scalpel. I remembered that night. Madeline looking at my vendor list, telling me to have my legal team triple-check the guarantors. I had laughed at her. I told her not to bring her paranoid audit brain into my deals. She must have been in so much pain. But she didn't argue. She just went to work and did her job perfectly. Harrison continued, if she hadn't caught this, your commercial team would have pushed it through because the pricing was so attractive. It's not a guaranteed scam, but the risk was massive. You need to pull all communications with this vendor immediately and halt negotiations. Your team needs to write a full incident report. I nodded, my throat tight. I'll get it done. The meeting lasted another hour, but I didn't process a single word. I took notes, answered questions, and kept my professional mask on. But inside, I was collapsing. The woman my mother called a curse, the woman my sister mocked, the woman my family accused of stealing money to pay off a debt, was the very woman who had silently saved me from $1 million disaster. She didn't demand credit. She didn't text me saying, "I saved your life, you idiot." She didn't use her professional skills to prove a point to my family. She maintained her integrity, her principles, and her grace. And what did I do? I used a $500 hospital bill receipt to accuse her of theft. After the meeting, I stood alone in the hallway. Outside the glass windows, the city was bustling, people rushing about their lives. I pulled out my phone and opened our text thread. My messages sat there, dry and arrogant. Let's talk. Don't make this ugly. Not a single apology. Not a single, "Are you okay?" Not a single. "Thank you for years of keeping my life together." I dialed her number. Still disconnected. For the first time, I wasn't annoyed that she wasn't answering. I was terrified. Terrified that she had walked much further away than I ever realized. Terrified that I hadn't just lost her in one night, but that I had been losing her for years, through every ignored insult, every demand for her to swallow her pride. And the most bitter realization of all, I didn't even know where my wife was until a stranger in a boardroom read her name off a report. I didn't go home that afternoon. I drove straight onto the interstate, heading for Chicago. I had to go to her corporate office. I had to find her manager. I had to know where she was, even though a dark truth was settling into my bones. I might no longer have the right to know. The drive to Chicago wasn't terrible, but I drove like a man without a soul. Gas stations, billboards, and strip malls blurred past. I gripped the steering wheel, functioning like a normal human being, but my mind was completely unspooled. I arrived at the massive logistics firm in downtown Chicago as the sun was setting. It was a sleek, quiet corporate high-rise. She had mentioned this building so many times, yet I had never once driven her to work, never once waited in the lobby for her to finish her shift. I walked up to the reception desk, my voice dry. "Hi, I'm here to see Madeline Hayes in risk management." The receptionist looked up politely. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "I am her husband." Saying that out loud felt shameful. A husband looking for his wife, having to use a legal title to introduce himself to a stranger. It sounded like authority, but I felt like I had absolutely none. The receptionist made a call. 10 minutes later, a middle-aged man in a sharp gray button-down walked out. He looked lean, with incredibly sharp, perceptive eyes. He introduced himself as Harrison Caldwell, the director of risk analytics, her boss. I stood up quickly. "I'm Arthur. I want to see Madeline, or at least know where she is." Harrison didn't change his expression. He motioned me into a small glass-walled meeting room. He poured 2 glasses of water. The room was meticulously organized, making me suddenly remember how neat Madeline kept her desk at home. Harrison slid a glass toward me. "Arthur, before we continue, I need to know if you're here for personal reasons or corporate business." "Personal," I answered immediately. "My family had a terrible misunderstanding. I want to apologize and bring her home." Harrison's face didn't move. Bring her home. Those 4 words hung in the air, and I felt my throat close up. I corrected myself. Softer. "If she is willing." Harrison sat up straight, folding his hands on the table. "You're her husband, and you don't know that she took a lateral transfer to our Dallas branch almost 9 weeks ago?" I froze. A quiet explosion went off in my brain. 9 weeks. That was exactly how long she had been gone. While I was sitting in Michigan waiting for her to cool off, she had packed up, moved across the country to Texas, and started a completely new life. He stammered. "Dallas? She's in Dallas?" Harrison kept his voice perfectly level. "She volunteered to lead an on-site supply chain audit for a new industrial hub down there. The project required someone who thrives under pressure, possesses extreme discipline, and has no issue relocating immediately. Madeline was the perfect fit." I stared into my water glass. The water was perfectly still, but my hands were shaking. "Did she say anything about our family?" Harrison paused for a moment before answering. "Within the boundaries of what I can share, Madeline never brought her personal life into the office. She executed her handover flawlessly, took the new assignment by the book, didn't complain, didn't ask for special treatment, and never asked the company to intervene in her private affairs." The words felt like ash in my mouth. That was Madeline. No matter how deeply she was hurting, she made sure never to inconvenience anyone else. She walked out of my house in the dead of winter, and still showed up to work without letting a single drop of her trauma spill onto anyone's desk. I asked, "Can you give me her new number? Or an address? I just want to speak to her one time." Harrison took off his glasses and wiped them carefully. "No, Arthur, I cannot. Employee information is strictly confidential. Furthermore, Madeline specifically instructed HR that any personal inquiries from her family must be routed through official channels. She has the right to refuse contact if she feels it jeopardizes her mental safety." I felt my face burn at the words, mental safety. My wife, the woman who slept next to me every night, had to ask a multi-billion-dollar corporation to protect her from me. Is there a more refined humiliation in this world? Probably, but I didn't need to experience it. I pleaded, "I'm not going to harass her. I was wrong. I need to say I'm sorry." Harrison looked at me longer this time. "Apologizing is your right. Whether she accepts it or even hears it is entirely hers." I bowed my head. That was terrifyingly fair. Harrison continued, his voice softer but still firm. Madeline is a brilliant analyst. She's quiet, she never seeks the spotlight, but a fraudulent file rarely makes it past her desk. She spots the red flags. Some people look soft on the outside, but their principles are made of iron. As her husband, you should have recognized that long before we did. I had no response. My mind was flooded with memories. Madeline working late on her laptop while I asked about my ironed shirt. Madeline warning me about the vendor while I called her paranoid. Madeline begging to visit her sick father while I worried about my mother's mood. Every tiny memory stitched together into a suffocating indictment. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. Harrison, if you can, please just pass a message to her through HR. Tell her I know I was wrong. Tell her I just want to see her for 5 minutes. Harrison stood up as well. I will pass it to HR, but I cannot guarantee she will read it, and I certainly cannot guarantee she will reply. I understand. In truth, I didn't understand anything yet. I was just beginning to learn that just because you finally want to knock on a door, it doesn't mean the person inside is obligated to open it. I walked out of the building and stood on the Chicago sidewalk for a long time. The city lights bled into the dark streets. I watched the crowds of people and suddenly felt incredibly small and pathetic. For years, I knew my wife liked butternut squash soup. I knew she tied her hair low. I knew she hated the smell of cigarette smoke. But I had no idea how brilliant she was. I had no idea how much she was enduring, and I had no idea she had been preparing to leave me. And the most bitter pill of all, I didn't even know what state my wife lived in until a stranger had to tell me. I drove back to Michigan in total silence. When I got home, my mother immediately asked, "Did you see her?" I didn't answer. I walked straight upstairs. Madeline's room was exactly as it had been. A thin layer of dust covered her small desk by the window. I stood in front of her desk drawer, my hand resting on the handle, terrified to open it. I had a sinking feeling that inside wasn't just old stationery, but things I had ignored, the wounds I had overlooked, and the evidence of my own unforgivable sins, waiting for me. I stood there for a long time before I finally pulled the drawer open. There wasn't much inside. A neatly clipped stack of personal documents. A few old receipts, a tiny sewing kit, some photos from our first year of marriage. And at the very bottom, a fabric-bound light blue notebook with slightly frayed edges. I recognized it. It was the notebook Madeline used when she made grocery lists, prepped for holidays, or sorted my father's medication. Back then, I used to tease her, "You act like you're managing a Fortune 500 company in that little book." She had smiled and said, "The company has software. This family just has me." I laughed back then. I didn't realize how profoundly sad that statement was. I opened the notebook. The first page was in her neat, precise handwriting. Dad's medication, yellow pill after breakfast, white pill before dinner. If he drinks coffee in the morning, make sure he eats toast first. I swallowed hard. The next page was about my mother. Mom's knee pain. When the weather drops, soak feet in Epsom salt for 15 minutes. Not too hot. If she gets irritable, don't argue back. She's probably just in pain. My hands started shaking. My mother had hurled the most vicious insults at Madeline, yet in her private notebook, Madeline reminded herself not to argue because my mother was hurting. I turned the page. Arthur, chronic stomach ulcer. Do not let him drink coffee on an empty stomach. If he has an early client meeting, pack a soft bagel or oatmeal in his briefcase. Pale blue dress shirt, save it for the first of the month. The color makes him look sharp. My eyes burned. I covered my face, but the tears leaked through my fingers. A 36-year-old man, who fancied himself the pillar of the family, collapsed over a handwritten note about bagels and dress shirts. It sounds so trivial, but those trivial, invisible acts of care are what keep a household breathing day after day. I flipped through faster. She had notes on everyone. Aunt Beatrice's vegan roast separate tray of vegetables. Uncle Silas can't do spicy, pull his portion out before adding chili. Clara loves the stuffing crispy, bake her a separate small dish. Clara's toddler doesn't like onions. Every person in my family, every habit, every ache, every preference, she memorized them all. And what did our family remember about her? We remembered exactly how much her parents owed the bank. We remembered exactly that she wired her sick father $500. We remembered enough to suspect her, to belittle her, but never enough to love her. Near the middle of the notebook, there was a section titled, My Family. Underneath, the entries were strictly itemized. Dad's copay, $150, from my Q2 bonus. Gas money for mom's hospital drives, $60, from my checking. Hospital deposit, $500. Personal savings. Note: do not use the joint account. Do not sign any guarantees. Do not let Arthur get involved or implicated. I stared at those lines, my face flushed with absolute shame. She was so careful, documenting the source of every single dollar she spent, as if she knew that one day her decency would be put on trial. And that day did come, and the most ruthless prosecutor in the room was her own husband. At the bottom of that page, written in slightly smaller, shakier handwriting, was a final note. If Arthur ever kicks me out, don't blame him. He is probably just overwhelmed by my family's debt. Just hope he remembers to eat before his coffee. A stomach ulcer is a terrible thing to live with. I couldn't read anymore. I collapsed over the desk, burying my face in the notebook, sobbing like a child. I wasn't crying because I lost face. I wasn't crying to garner sympathy. It was the agonizing wail of a man who realized he was so fundamentally broken that there was no excuse left to hide behind. I didn't realize my mother had been standing in the doorway. She looked at me, then at the notebook. "What is it, Arthur?" I couldn't speak. I just handed the notebook to her. My mother took it. At first, she frowned, but as she read, her hands began to tremble violently. When she reached the page about her foot baths, she sank onto the edge of the bed, her lips parting several times before she could force the words out. She wrote down how to treat my knees? I managed to croak. She remembered everything, and we only remembered how to hurt her. My mother broke down. Her crying wasn't loud, but it was a strangled, distorted sob from deep in her chest. The woman who had pointed at the door and commanded her daughter-in-law to leave was now clutching her notebook, tears staining the pages. My father heard the crying and limped down the hall. I quickly stood up to help him into a chair. My mother handed him the notebook. My father put on his reading glasses and read very slowly. He stopped at the page about his medication for a long, long time. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. "This book holds all the pain of this family," his voice cracked. "And this family did nothing but carve into hers." No one could say anything else. Later that evening, Clara came over, probably called by my mother. She walked into the room with her usual irritated energy, but seeing us sitting in dead silence around a little blue notebook, she quieted down. "What's going on?" I handed it to her. "Read it." Clara took it. She flipped a few pages, her face turning pale when she reached the part about her crispy stuffing and her toddler's onions. Her lips trembled. She had mocked Madeline at the Thanksgiving table, yet Madeline had still documented exactly how to make her favorite food. Clara closed the notebook, her voice tiny. I didn't know she wrote this stuff down." My father looked at her. "It's not that we didn't know. It's that no one in this house cared to know." Clara lowered her head. For the first time in her life, she didn't argue. She didn't offer an excuse. She didn't say, "I was just joking." The room was silent, but this silence wasn't avoidance. It was the crushing weight of the truth pressing down on every single one of us. My mother covered her face. "I have to see her. I have to apologize to Madeline. Even if she screams at me, I'll take it." My father said slowly, "Just because we want to see her doesn't mean she has to see us. But we still have to go. Not to drag her back, but to bow our heads properly." I looked at the notebook in Clara's hands and noticed the yellowed edge of the paper. Suddenly, I remembered the night Madeline left, carrying that feather-light duffel bag. It turns out, she didn't take much with her, because she had left her entire life's devotion right here in this room. I said, "I'm flying to Dallas. I want to see her and apologize." My father nodded. "I'm going with you." My mother wiped her face. "I'm going too. I owe her an apology." None of us said Madeline would forgive us. None of us dared to hope she would come home. Because after reading that notebook, we all understood she didn't leave in a fit of rage. She left because she had endured until there was nothing left to give. That night, I placed the notebook exactly where I found it, right under her desk lamp. I didn't dare pack it. It belonged to her, but every word inside it was permanently carved into me. Our flight took off from Grand Rapids under an overcast sky. My father sat by the window, holding a small plastic bag with his medication. My mother sat in the middle, her hands tightly clasped, staring out the window and occasionally wiping her eyes. I sat on the aisle. In my jacket pocket was a letter of apology I had rewritten a dozen times, yet every word felt pathetically inadequate compared to what I had done. We landed in Dallas. The highways were massive, choked with 18-wheelers, lined with corporate parks, warehouses, and sprawling developments. My mother was used to Michigan, where everyone in town knew the Sterling hardware store. Here, swallowed by a massive, foreign metropolis, she lost every ounce of the arrogance she used to wield. She whispered to me, "Arthur, when we see her, let me speak first, okay?" I looked at her. "What are you going to say?" She bowed her head, her voice cracking. "I'm going to say I'm sorry. I'm going to tell her I was wrong. I won't ask her to come back. I just want her to look at me one time." My father closed his eyes and sighed. "Remember, we are here to apologize, not to collect a debt. Whether she sees us or not is entirely her right." My mother nodded. For the first time, she didn't argue. The corporate logistics branch where Madeline worked was located in a highly secure corporate plaza. Security was tight, guests had to register, show ID, and wait in a formal reception lounge. The three of us sat on the gray, modern sofas, as silent as patients sitting in a doctor's waiting room knowing the diagnosis is terminal. After a while, a woman in her 30s walked in. She wore a sharp blazer, her hair pulled back neatly. Her tone was completely professional. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling and Arthur. I am Valerie Jenkins, the HR and legal liaison for this branch. Madeline is aware that you are here." My mother immediately stood up. "Please, can I just see her for a few minutes? I am her mother-in-law. I came to apologize." Valerie looked at my mother. Her eyes weren't cruel, but they were absolutely resolute. "Madeline has respectfully declined a face-to-face meeting. She asks that your family respect her decision." My mother swayed. My father had to grab her arm to help her sit back down. My heart plummeted into my stomach. My voice came out as a raspy whisper. "Valerie, please. I just want to see her once. I won't make a scene. I won't pressure her to come back. I just need to say I'm sorry." Valerie replied, "I understand. But apologizing is what you need. Protecting her peace is what she needs. Madeline has made it very clear she does not want a private meeting, and she does not want her mental well-being compromised during this time." My mother broke down into loud sobs. "Please, just ask her again. I know I was vicious to her. I know I was wrong. I just beg her to let me say one sentence." Valerie remained silent for a moment. Then, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her folder. Madeline left a message. I will read it verbatim, per her instructions. The room went completely still. Valerie read slowly and clearly. "Thank you to Dad, Mom, and Arthur for making the trip down here, but I respectfully declined to meet. The day I needed someone to defend me, no one spoke. The day I was thrown out, no one asked me to stay. Over the past 9 weeks, I have learned how to live without waiting for anyone to show me mercy." My mother covered her mouth, choking on her tears. My father turned his face away, his shoulders shaking. Valerie continued, "I do not blame Dad. I hope Mom takes care of her health. Please do not soak your knees too late at night. I hope Arthur takes better care of his diet, and please remember to eat before drinking coffee. As for me, I just want peace. If our paths ever cross again, I hope we can meet as decent strangers, not out of guilt or obligation." I stared at the floor. She still told my mother how to soak her feet. She still told me to eat before my coffee. A woman we had tortured to the point of no return, and her final words to us didn't contain a single drop of venom. That pure, unwavering grace was what suffocated me the most. I pulled the letter from my jacket and placed it on the glass table with both hands. "Please, give this to her. If she throws it away, that's fine. Just let her know." I bowed my head. Valerie took the envelope. "I will pass it along according to protocol. Whether she opens it, I cannot promise." We walked out of the corporate plaza into the blazing Texas sun. My mother couldn't walk straight. My father had to hold her up. No one said a word. On the ride back to the airport, my mother stared out the window, muttering to herself, "I'm sorry, Maddie. But I know you don't need to hear it anymore." My father closed his eyes, tears slipping into the deep wrinkles on his face, and I realized that the letter of apology I left behind was like throwing a handful of sand into a raging river. It might reach her, it might not, but even if it did, it would never make the river flow backward. We returned to Michigan. The house was exactly the same. The hardware store downstairs was open. The bags of concrete were stacked. Customers still asked for prices on lumber and gravel. But the house in the back was freezing. In Madeline's room, her hairbrush sat on the vanity. Her brown scarf hung over the chair. Her little blue notebook lay under the lamp. The potted plants on the back porch were half dead, brown leaves scattering across the patio tiles. I stood in front of the door, looking at the hook where she used to hang my blue dress shirt. In that moment, I finally understood. The greatest punishment in life isn't your wife screaming at you, it isn't your relatives judging you, or losing face in front of society. The ultimate, most devastating punishment is when the person you owe your life's apology to simply no longer needs you. In this life, never use a family's financial ruin as an excuse to trample on a good woman. Never call a wife's silent endurance her duty, and never confuse a husband's cowardice with keeping the peace. If you want a warm home, you have to protect the person keeping the fire lit. Because once they walk out that door, all the money and pride in the world cannot buy back the warmth they took with them. If you found value in this story, please leave a like for our channel. Thank you for listening to the very end. We wish you health, peace, and warmth at your own family dinner tables. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next story.